how long did this novel take you to write? We're talking launch week. How long ago did you officially say, okay, I think I'm going to write a novel about this history?
Okay, so it took a long time. Even by publishing standards, it took a long time. And for me, it was okay. I had started, I don't have a traditional background as a writer, and I sort of fell into writing when my kids were little, maybe around 2008, 2009. And I puttered around a little bit with picture book writing, and it was the first time I even considered writing fiction, and it was such a wonderful experience. I wrote a few books. They were god-awful. I wrote a few, but it was just so fulfilling, and it was just such a wonderful creative outlet. And I was, getting so much inspiration from my own children that I started to attend conferences. I eventually hooked up with a critique group. I did want to improve my craft because it gave me and still gives me so much joy. So, I puttered around with picture books for a couple of years, and that was wonderful. And then, it just was a natural progression for me to think about my own family history and all the stories that were told around me, and to want to sort of aggregate this all and write a novel. So probably I thought of the idea around 2009, and I really committed to it around 2010. And it wasn't until 2015 that I started subbing out to agents. So it took 5 years, which was okay. In that time, I taught myself how to write a novel. As I just mentioned, my only background was with picture books. And that was okay. I would, take time out for conferences, and I would read how-to books, and I would, watch craft videos. There's a huge emotional element when you write about a difficult emotional topic, and that's compounded if it's your own family. So, I would conduct interviews with my family, and I could tell, sometimes members would get visibly upset. And then later, as I stewed on the information and tried to make sense of it, it's upsetting for me. So I would have to step back sometimes and take emotional breaks. And then I, could return to it, with a fresh set of eyes. So it took a while, but I was comfortable with the journey because, I didn't want to cut corners with my research. I didn't want to cut corners with craft. I knew I was learning the business of writing as I was writing it. So, I hope future novels won't take me 5 years. I don't think they will, but it's okay. And it was enjoyable, the amount of time that I spent on this one.
Lots of questions to unpack there. Let's start with these interviews. When you go in to interview a family member, or anybody, are you sitting down and putting like a tape recorder between you? Are you putting up a camera? Are you just taking notes? What's your approach?
Okay, so when I first started, I had 2 family members in this country, and I didn't use a tape recorder. I had a wealth of knowledge just from growing up with these 2 family members. They are my maternal grandparents, and I grew up with them. So I already had a good, solid basis of information going into the start of the writing process. So no, I didn't use a tape recorder. I took notes, and then I verified and validated the information that they told me. Both of my grandparents actually in the 90s were interviewed for the Shell Foundation, which documents Holocaust survivors. And so just the basics of, some of their important memories, where they lived, information about professions, that was already documented in video form, not by me, but, 10 years before me. The other 2 members of my family are my paternal side, my aunt and uncle, who don't speak a lick of English, and they were in Germany at the time. So what I would do when I would see them, I'm able to communicate a little bit. My German language skills aren't so great nowadays. But how I really got most of the information, I would type out my questions and I would give it to them. And they love talking about history. I think, my uncle in particular, he just enjoys talking about his own experiences. He enjoys, thinking about history. And so he would type out his answers. And then my sister, who has much better German language skills than I do, would help me translate it.
So I assume she's thanked profusely in the acknowledgments.
She'll be
at the launch party, and you can hold up her hand and say, "Thank God."
Oh, my wonderful sister, Jessica Meyer. She's amazing.
And so, okay, so you were supplying written questions and then they were recording themselves to get back to you or talking to you in person for the German interviews?
They would write it out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then maybe I'd follow up with when I would see them, I'd follow up with a question or two in person.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And then over 5 years, how long did it take you to get to a first draft? Because I assume first draft is just a starting place.
Oh my. That it was just such a fluid experience over those 5 years. I can't recall exactly when that happened, but by 2015, I was subbing out to agents.
Gotcha. And so when did you always envision this as a middle grade novel, or did you ever think maybe I could take an adult's perspective on this, or did you have a clear understanding of what your plot would be from the start?
That's a great question. I did some research, and there are some wonderful juvenile fiction books about the period. The majority of them cover the war years. There wasn't that much available that covered the pre-war years, and especially 1938, and especially Kristallnacht, which was just so important. It's such an important year. You stand in 1938 and you can look back and you kind of see how things built up to then, and then you look forward and you see what will come next. So I think it was probably a combination how I came to this. Number one, I felt a need for it. Number two, I wanted to do middle grade, and keeping the story confined to Kristallnacht in 1938 seemed appropriate for that age group. Again, there's some wonderful books that exist that cover the later years. They can be a little intense for the younger children. So the other thing I wanted to do was they're growing up. I often receive questions like, I hear questions like, oh, how could this have happened? Why didn't your family do this? Why didn't your family do that? And there's just there's temptation to categorize and compartmentalize the whole era and say, okay, this entire race of people is bad. This entire race of people are victims. And there's a million different perspectives, and there's a lot of nuanced information leading up to that. And I wanted to capture it, and I wanted to humanize that whole experience. I also think that I wanted to focus on middle grade, probably because of the age of my own family members were roughly tweens and teens during that period. So I had probably, as I'm thinking of 1938 and I'm thinking of my grandmother hiding in the woods during Kristallnacht, she was about 12 at that time. So I think I had an image of that age group during that time already in my head.
Gotcha. So that was always going to be, that was, I gotcha. Follow-up question to that then. When you're composing a fictional narrative, because this isn't a biography, how do you weigh the need to tell your family's story, tell what's important to you personally? Yeah. How do you balance that against creating a fictional narrative that's going to be larger and going to explore the themes that you want to explore?
That's, again, a great question. And I think along the way, I was fortunate. I was able to ask my relatives, and I made it really clear, this isn't going to be, a biography about anybody. This isn't going to be nonfiction. This is fictionalized. And, I would tell them what kind of plot turns it was taking. I even helped them. At one point, I was stuck on a plot point. I even asked them, well, what do you suggest? And they got into, they got really into having a creative session with me, and they were just so supportive. So I think just a lot of interaction throughout the entire process with my family members, gave me confidence. Everybody was excited. Everybody was comfortable with the direction that I was taking.
Gotcha. So you made sure they were on board, and so there's not going to be a moment at the launch party where they said, you didn't understand anything we said. This is terrible.
Oh my goodness. No.